I love making Hoi 4 mod concepts. I loved it so much that I made a whole YouTube channel about it. But what you might not know about me is that I have 5,400 hours on EU4. So it should be no surprise I'm excited for EU5. But the problem is, EU5's start date is different than EU4's, making the mods that I knew and loved, like Third Odyssey, impossible to replicate. So that got me thinking, what could be EU5's Kaiserreich? Or Victoria 3's Divergences of Darkness? In this video, we're going to be looking at my answer. What if the Mongols invaded Europe in 1246? Instead of answering this question purely on my own, I'll be taking the alternate history video series made by the Wizard and Warriors channel, the second channel of Kings and Generals, with the same premise. The point of divergence is that Batu Khan's son doesn't die, which prevents Batu from abandoning his planned European campaign. The ending of the series has the Venetians attempting to rally a large resistance to the Mongolian advance. They trigger an uprising in occupied Hungary, connect with them, and succeed in removing the Mongolian forces there. Batu retreats back to Karakorum, but dies on the way, and the Venetian Doge dies as well. And unfortunately, that's where their story ends.
There are other stories, perhaps, for another day somewhere else.
In order to properly flesh out this timeline with my take, I'm going to be making this Venetian attempt to liberate Hungary fail, and build on the scenario with my own historical assumptions so that we can reach the EU5 start date of 1337. The immediate aftermath of the failed Venetian gambit quickly crashes in upon them. The Mongolian hordes stampede into Sponheim and the mainland territories of Venice, isolating the Republic to only its islands. And those who allied with Venice, like the Bulgarians and Serbians, had key crossing points annexed away from them and their tributary deals enforced even harder than before. While this victory could mean a renewed campaign into the continent, the several key battles of resistance that the Europeans had subjected them to had left them exhausted and overextended. With such a major threat to their primary operating base, the Golden Horde withdraws back into Hungary as to properly integrate it into their empire. But what would such a large demographic shift of European Christians into their section of the empire mean for the Golden Horde, the Mongolian Empire, in Europe? That's what we'll be exploring in this video. But of course, if you're interested in watching the original video, please check it out here in the top right, as we will inevitably spoil some, but not all, of the amazing twists and turns that define the fate of Europe. Without further ado, let's get started. While the Mongols may have reoccupied the Italian lands, they would not be administering it directly themselves. Instead, they transferred the territory to their Italian ally as a measure of goodwill. In this alternate history, Frederick II had decided to align with the Mongolians, not only to protect his lands from being carved out by the forces of the Seventh Crusade, as they crowned a pretender emperor in the north, but to protect the life of his son, who would be the first target of the Crusaders. Frederick II would write to Batu, seeking an alliance in exchange for Conrad to be returned to him. The Mongolians accept, and managed to cross through the Alps thanks to Frederick II's seal. This eventually results in the largest twist of the series, the destruction of Rome by the Mongols. Deceived and betrayed by ambitious local lords, the Mongolians utterly destroyed the holiest city in Europe. The trauma of such an atrocity would reverberate through the entire Catholic world. While many regional Catholic heresies would begin to gain a lot more traction, the Archbishopric of Mainz would become the new epicenter of papal authority, reinforced by the coordination that the Crusaders against the Mongols had received from the papal outpost. This papal successor would encourage many within the subjecthood of Italy to revolt. However, these efforts would fall on deaf ears, as a new heresy was brewing in Italy. The Mongolian Empire's conquests were fueled by the belief that the sky god, Tengri, had blessed Genghis and his line with the sacred task of subjugating the world to their rule. Genghis has even been quoted as saying that he is the punishment of God, claiming that, if the people that he had conquered had not sinned, their God would not have sent him to punish them. This belief would reverberate in the consciousness of the Catholics who were subjugated by Batu. If God had truly favored the Pope in Rome, then why did Rome fall to the punishment of God? The only reasonable conclusion would be that Batu and his Golden Horde had carried out God's will and should be revered for it. Seeing no other choice, the Italian emperor would adopt this religious view himself, quickly establishing a new papacy in Rome. Seeing the opportunity to cement their rule in the region and reinforce the narrative that justified their slaughter of Europe, the Khan of the Great Horde, Batu, or his successor, would recognize this heretical sect, convert to it, and be baptized as Khan Michael. This interpretation of the acts of violence of the second coming of the Huns would not be eagerly embraced by them, but as the Khan's armies spread the word of his conversion, the legitimacy of this heresy would increase significantly, and the Tengri Catholic syncretic religion that would be known as Michaelism would begin to propagate in all the lands in which the Khan had influence, to the absolute horror of the Mainz Catholics, who would desperately attempt to rally a crusade of liberation. But before they could have any hope of succeeding, they had to attend to matters in France, where a succession war was well underway. The King of France, who, in our timeline, had played a pivotal role in the 7th and 8th Crusades, would be the backbone of European resistance against the Mongol threat. Through his leadership, the Mongols would suffer a brutal defeat, but at the cost of his own life in the battle. In our timeline, he was succeeded by his son. In this timeline, his son would have passed away, and therefore, following French succession laws, the Kingdom of France would be granted to his grandson. The child that would become Louis X would be the epicenter of a regency of his mother. While the exact nature of the schemes would only be for the original author to know, I believe that Charles I would be the one to ultimately rule France. Charles was the brother of Louis IX. Known for his ambition, he had collaborated with the Pope in the ultimate deposition of the Hohenstaufens from Sicily by gaining the kingdom through conquest. This is something that he demanded in this timeline as well, but after his brother died and his great-nephew had come to rule France, he would scheme to push his claim to the kingdom. He would kill his brother, Alphonse, to eliminate rival claimants, gain a fleet with his new allies to eliminate the Sponaceden, Frederick, for favor of the Catholic world, before turning his forces on his great-nephew to unite France under his holy rule. While it may seem like quite a stretch, I do believe that he would have ultimately been successful, seeing as how we're told of his kinslaying is through a play that depicted his cause as just. Such plays would only be allowed to be performed if it had painted their king in a good light. Therefore, we will have Charles succeed in his bid to conquer France. Charles would prevent further religious fracturing by recognizing the Mainz papacy and be coronated by them. Being anointed by a pope, even if it was one in exile, would give Charles the ability to wield the most powerful European state as a weapon against his foes. Charles was named after Charlemagne, who had been crowned Roman Emperor of the West by the Pope after saving him from being mutilated. With Charles's unbridled ambition, it may be that he would organize a crusade against the heretic Italians, with the goal of restoring Germany's claim to the Holy Roman Empire, the Pope back in Rome, and gaining his promised territory of the Kingdom of Sicily. But conditional to this grand campaign would be that he would need to be coronated as the next Holy Roman Emperor. Upon being crowned King of Germany, he would march to Rome in order to get the Mainz Pope to properly coronate him just like his namesake before him. As his forces would cross the Alps, the Golden Horde would send reinforcements to defend their Italian ally, and several bloody battles along the Po River would define the next century of Europe. But who would win this struggle? While it may be really interesting to see a Holy Roman Empire dominated by France, which encompasses the entirety of the Roman imperial provinces of Italia, Gaul, and most of the hypothetical province of Germania, I think it would be far more interesting to have the Mongol-Italian forces prevent an outright conquest, but not a total victory either, as we'll have Charles die by the Khan's hands. Despite the failure of this crusade, it would have accomplished most of its goals. There were no longer two Holy Roman Empires, as the Italian Empire would have lost hegemony over the former imperial province. The former homelands of the Hohenstaufens would be consolidated under the rule of the Habsburgs, as it is already canon from the video itself, and would become a heavily militarized region, as the former region of the Italian Empire, Bavaria, would become a Mongolian tributary. A similar arrangement would exist in Meissen and Carignola, granting the Mongolians buffer states in case they elect to abandon their Italian ally. With Charles's short-sightedness and ambition, he would have not only brought the French kingdom under strain from 2 consecutive crusades, but would also have ravaged it in a succession war in between. The result of this failed crusade would mean that yet another succession war would come to the Kingdom of France. England, who likely had been conspiring to take the entirety of the kingdom itself during Louis's regency, would claim that Charles and his line were illegitimate, and would move into Paris in an attempt to gain the seat of the kingdom before any other pretender could press their claim. With the rapid decrease of authority in the French kingdom, polities bordering the Holy Roman Empire would transfer their oaths of loyalty to whomever would be elected the next emperor in order to avoid the ravages of a second succession war. This conflict would last for a long period of time, but would ultimately result in England controlling the northwest of France, the Holy Roman Emperor integrating the northeast into their empire, leaving the rest of France to the successors of Charles. As the boundaries between the European powers solidify, so too does the nature of the Mongolian presence in the east. While they had initially been extremely ruthless, the continued hold that they have over the east has adapted the Golden Horde to be far different than our history. In our timeline, the Mongolian Empire was split into 4 large realms, with each son of Genghis given their own region to administer. Over time, these regions began to act more and more independent of the Khan and Khanbalik, and would be recognized as their own states. The Golden Horde was the westernmost region of the Mongolian Empire, and was very culturally distinct from their eastern kin. Being mostly populated by Turks, they had naturally adopted Islam through assimilation, and would rule the Rus principalities indirectly. The Golden Horde would eventually stagnate, fall to civil war, lose control over the Russians, and ultimately be subjugated by their former tax farm. But in this timeline, the Golden Horde is far different, as Batu and his descendants have conquered or otherwise subjugated Eastern Europe for themselves, resulting in a far different future for the Golden Horde. The conquest of Hungary and its internal subjugation through the brainwashing of the Hungarian prince would lead to the Pannonian Basin becoming one of the Mongolian Empire's greatest assets. Its fertile grounds and flat plains have been a perfect place to stage raids against all of their neighboring territories. Not only that, but the Danube and the Hungarian kingdom's established trade routes would allow for German and Adriatic trade to flood through, making this timeline's Buda the European endpoint of the Silk Road rather than Azov. Over time, the sedentary lifestyle of the Hungarian nobility would rub off on the Mongolian ruling class, creating an incredibly unique cultural blend. A Mongolian upper class, supported by soldiers from Orthodox Slavic and Islamic Turkish lands, fed and supplied by a Hungarian lower class, with the former Hungarian ruling class further embedding themselves with the Mongolian Empire through marriages. Chinese merchants come to Pest, trading their goods and technologies with Italian merchants, all while the entire region is practicing a new Christian sect, which adopted several Tengri customs in reverence of their Khan. As time goes on, and the looting economy becomes less effective than stable trade, there would be a significant divide growing between the sedentary Danubians and the nomadic Volgans. The hordes of the Volga would be far more reminiscent of the Golden Horde of our history. Rather than adopting Christianity, they would be Islamic, as the local trade with Turks would naturally lead to such things. The geography of the Volga and its surrounding territories would not lend itself to sedentarism, as the Danubians had enjoyed, and thus a cultural divide would eventually cause the Golden Horde to split between the sedentary Christian Danubian horde and the nomadic Islamic Volga horde. The sudden split between 2 different Khans would allow for tributaries bordering the 2 major regions to become a source of conflict between the two, eventually eroding their tributary networks to allow for previously subservient tributaries to break free. Most notably would be the Byzantine Empire, which would have been reclaimed far earlier thanks to the Venetian purchase of the Latin Empire and their subsequent collapse. The earlier reclamation of Constantinople and lack of Catholic support for the Crusader remnants in Epirus and Athens would allow for them to be reintegrated into their empire without much contest. But the subservience of the Bulgarian and Serbian states to the Khanate would prevent the Byzantines from attempting any sort of reconquest. Instead, they would look to reclaim Rome itself, cutting off the Michaelite heresy from its roots through an acquisition of Sicily, either through diplomatic or violent means. If the Byzantines were able to re-establish the Patriarchate of Rome, local Catholics and Michaelites who were forced to cow down to the Khan may instead become Orthodox, mending the schism and significantly improve the influence that the Byzantine Empire would hold over Eastern Europe. Regardless of the ambitions of the Byzantines, the division of the formerly Golden Horde would become a major opportunity for the Holy Roman Empire to reclaim its eastern border from the Danubian Khanate. The alternate geopolitical scenario here would be fascinating through the lens of EU5's systems. The Michaelite Christians of the Danubian Khanate and the Mainz Catholics may be enemy religions, but the animosity that England has towards the Holy Roman Empire may lead to them beginning a reformation for themselves, the result of which would become the second phase of a French succession war between the HRE and England, giving the Danubians an opportunity to consolidate their tributaries into full-on marches of their empire. But their power would be diminished if the cultural unrest of their nation reaches a breaking point. If the Danubians are able to manage their vast cultural makeup, the Mongolic-Hungarian hybrid culture may persist, or the entirety of the Danubian Khanate would collapse under its own weight. The gameplay mechanics of this scenario are incredibly exciting to consider. There's also the diplomatic scenario, wherein the Volga Khanate may seek to conquer the Danubian Khanate and reclaim the Golden Horde, or vice versa. But with the Volga Khanate's larger presence in the region, a Muscovite uprising and unification of the Russians may never come, instead resulting in a slower adoption of sedentarism to eventually give rise to an Islamic Tartarian empire in Eastern Europe. But far beyond the Old World, the New World is yet to be discovered and colonized. With England dominating France and the Christian Iberians significantly weakened, the Andalusians may end up being the most powerful colonial power in the world. The Reconquista in our timeline was heavily funded through gold and manpower by French support. Without France, the Nasrids of Granada may be strong enough to claim Cordoba and resist further incursions by Portugal, Castile, and Aragon. The spiritual vacuum of Rome's sacking would further exacerbate things, as the regionalist Christian sects of Mozarabs would gain a resurgence, potentially being integrated into Andalusia once again. What sort of world could manifest as a result of this point of divergence, paired with the ambitious simulation project that is EU5? Thanks to the amazing foundation that the Wizards and Warriors channel have made, allowed for us to establish an incredible EU5 scenario that I hope you're interested to see as well. Thank you all to those who worked on such an incredible project. I hope that my continuation of the timeline has done it justice. Don't forget to watch their video if you haven't already. Thank you very much for watching, and special thanks to my channel members for their continued support. Don't start a land war in Asia, and I hope you have a good day.